Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Greater Houston Partnership and Center for Houston's Futures presentation of the Future of Global Energy, presented by Chevron. Please join us in thanking the following conference sponsors for the support of this event and dedication to strengthening Houston's role in leading the energy transition. The Future of Global Energy presenting sponsor, Chevron. Our Day 2 Reinventing to Lead the Energy Transition sponsor, Accenture. The Day 3 Creating Houston's New Hydrogen Economy sponsor, Deloitte. At the gold level, the 23rd World Petroleum Congress, Bechtel Oil, Gas and Chemicals, BP America Inc., ConocoPhillips, Ernst & Young LLP, ExxonMobil Corporation, Halliburton Labs, RSM US LLP, Sempra Energy, Shell Oil Company. Today's silver sponsors: Baker Tilly US LLP, BDO, Burns & McDonnell Inc., Calpine Corporation, CenterPoint Energy, Cheniere Energy Inc., Cognite, McDermott, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Pasadena Economic Development Corporation, Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman LLP, Tudor Pickering Holt & Company. Our bronze level sponsors: Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, Energy Corridor, Haynes & Boone LLP, Slalom, Targa Resources Corporation, and Conference Information Card Underwriter, PNC Bank. Thank you as well to the following partners for their support in making the future of global energy possible. Strategy partner, McKinsey & Company. Executive production partner, Ward & Ames Special Events. And transportation partner, Metro. The Greater Houston Partnership would also like to thank its 2021 signature sponsors. These sponsors provide generous annual commitments that support the partnership in delivering hundreds of events, business resource groups, and meetups to its members. Center for Houston's Future event and programs throughout the year are made possible in part by generous ongoing support from our annual sponsors. The Greater Houston Partnership and Center for Houston's Future would also like to extend a special thank you to their respective board members and member companies for their ongoing dedication to advancing the partnership and center's missions. We would also like to acknowledge members of Houston's Consular Corps for their work in positioning Houston as a great global city and strengthening international business relations across the world. Finally, we acknowledge the elected officials that represent the Greater Houston region at the local, state, and federal level for their leadership and commitment to our region. Please join us in thanking all that have made the inaugural Future of Global Energy possible.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Phillip, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the Greater Houston Partnership. Thanks for joining us for Day 2 of the Future of Global Energy Conference. Yesterday, we heard a keynote presentation from Bobby Tudor outlining the Houston Energy Transition Strategy, our plan to position Houston to lead the global energy transition to a low carbon future. Bobby, who chairs the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, talked about the various pathways and how decisive action could help Houston create more than 500,000 new jobs by 2050. The plan outlines the various attributes that make Houston uniquely suited to drive the transition, from our skilled, technically oriented workforce to our sizable transportation and logistics infrastructure that offers an ideal platform for implementing large-scale decarbonization initiatives. Finally, the strategy lays out a blueprint for how Houston will lead that rests on three broad objectives: jumpstarting emerging sectors where Houston has a competitive advantage, a focus on attracting and supporting new energy companies, and creating an environment that encourages investment in a wide range of value chains across the entire range of energy industries. I invite you to visit our website, houston.org/energy conference, to read the full plan. Today, we are going to delve a bit deeper into some of the specific ways we can achieve the goals put forward in the strategy, particularly as it relates to carbon capture, use, and storage, or CCUS. We'll hear a presentation in a few moments from Dr. Julio Friedman, Senior Research Scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. Dr. Friedman will discuss what it will take for Houston to become a net zero industrial hub and how industry and federal investment can be leveraged to make it happen. Following that will be a panel discussion with experts to dig further into the fundamentals of carbon capture from a number of different angles. Later on this morning, we'll host a series of inspiration segments to help us begin to think differently about energy transition, from talent reskilling to attracting new startups. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our sponsors whose names you saw before the start of this session for helping make this conference possible. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julio Friedman, the author of a new white paper funded by the Mitchell Foundation on Houston as a zero carbon industrial hub. In addition to being a senior research scholar at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, he recently served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Fossil Energy at the Department of Energy, where he was responsible for DOE's R&D program in advanced fossil energy systems, carbon capture and storage, CO2 utilization, and clean coal deployment. A great person to talk on this topic. He is also the CEO of Carbon Wrangler and is a distinguished associate at the Energy Futures Initiative and serves as a special advisor to the Global CCS Institute. He was recently named as a senior fellow to the Breakthrough Institute and the Climate Leadership Council. Dr. Friedman is one of the most widely known and authoritative experts in the US on carbon removal, CO2 conversion and use, and carbon capture and sequestration. His expertise includes technology, policy, and operations. Dr. Friedman, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's really a treat to be here. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you as well to Bobby Tudor, to Drew Nelson at the Cynthia George Mitchell Foundation, to this extraordinary set of panelists. I'd also like to thank my co-authors, Mehek Agarwal and Amar Bhardwaj, who helped me very much pull this report together. Essentially, we are in a net zero world now. We have to get to net zero as quickly as we can. And that means every week is infrastructure week. We got to build stuff. And hubs and clusters, this idea of net zero industrial hubs, is a relatively new idea that can be used to develop and focus that infrastructure in a way which is cost effective, in a way which empowers communities, in a way that delivers a clean energy future. And a cluster or a hub is very simple. It's a place where you got a bunch of assets, power stations, plants, mills, docks, pipelines, all these sorts of things. And unlike current practice, in the future, you'll be running all of that on zero carbon electricity or zero carbon hydrogen, and you'll be making those fuels and shipping them. Low carbon products are also made and exported from these sites. And ultimately, CO2 that is produced on site is captured and stored, so it stays out of the atmosphere indefinitely. This is not an altogether new topic, although it's recent. This has been the talk of the town in Europe for quite a while. In particular, the United Kingdom has been very forward-leaning on this topic and has recently had a competition where they will award 4 out of 6 hubs under competition today One of those hubs examples is Teesside. And we're blessed with Dr. Briony Livesey from the UKRI to talk a bit about that. But this is a very straightforward idea. Teesside is a place that has a lot of petrochemical production, a little bit of steel, a lot of heavy manufacturing, and they're basically going to make hydrogen on site, capture any byproduct CO2, electrify what they can, and take the CO2 offshore for storage. They are by no means the only place doing this around the world. There are a lot of places that are coming up around the world. In addition to the UK hubs in Rotterdam, in Ravenna, Italy, in Denmark, people are trying to build these things quickly as a way to maximize their impact in a commercial world where carbon is constrained. This is ultimately about trade. This is about jobs. And there's reasons why these hubs have value. One of those values is you make a lot of energy with net zero emissions. That's great.
I think those numbers have gone up a bit to 7th or something like that. You have close to $2 trillion of economic activity every year, hundreds of billions of dollars of exports, and it's been growing very, very quickly. About 10% of total manufacturing takes place in Texas, and a lot of that in Houston. For all these reasons, it is also America's #1 emitter. When it comes to greenhouse gases, Texas is second to none. And the Houston area, because of its concentration of heavy industry and power stations and so forth, is responsible for a large part of that. It is also the 40th in air quality. It is not great in terms of pollution, and health impacts associated with that put Texas on 48th out of 50 in terms of states. So here's an opportunity to do better. And the hubs, in fact, provide that opportunity. A hub is a place where you can combine a construction agenda with a reduction agenda. You can build stuff that benefits the future while you reduce criteria pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. And Houston is not the only place along the Gulf Coast you might do this. You could do this Port Arthur, for example, or Corpus Christi. Houston has, though, a real unique set of assets in the form of its heavy manufacturing. And if you look at the pie chart here, this gives you a sense the power plants are in fact not the largest emitter. The heavy industry is. The chemical and refining sector is about 40% of the emissions of greenhouse gases and a lot of the pollution control. After that, you also have coal-fired power plants and natural gas-fired power plants, but mostly natural gas-fired power plants in Houston. Hubs do best, a net zero hub, when you can combine these economic resources like skilled labor and infrastructure with natural resources like cheap gas and places to store CO2. And boy, Houston has that stuff in spades. It is unquestionably got one of the best geological storage resources in the world. And these emissions sources, the refineries, the power plants, are in fact close to CO2 sinks. By close, like in some cases within, say, 10 miles, in some cases more like 50 or 60 miles, but they're not that far. And in fact, there's a terrific opportunity to capture and store the emissions from this concentrated site, and again, manage the total cost of infrastructure as a result. Part of what we did in our study was to try to just get a sense of what the infrastructure costs were going to be. And so we did a sort of a quick assessment. This is in our report. The methodology and the resources and citations are there. And we're putting out a larger, more comprehensive version of this in a few months. But I wanted to give you a sense of what this looks like. We just said, well, let's make 1 million tons of clean hydrogen. What are the electrolyzer capacity we need? 1 million tons a year of hydrogen is a lot. We chose relatively cheap electrolyzers, $800 a kilowatt. You need 14 gigawatts of them. That's $11 billion of electrolyzers. If you want to make the generation that goes with it, that's $12 billion, about 50 terawatt hours a year. For reference, Texas is about 350 terawatt hours. So 50 is not a small number here. It's about 15% of what Texas makes and uses every year. And almost twice the renewable power that it currently makes. You need some pipelines. We put in an estimate here of about 20 million tons of capture, so about 20 million tons of pipelines. We assumed that they were going to go about 30 miles and mix to onshore and offshore. It's about $500 billion, $500 million of pipelines, about $500 million. We also said, let's assume we're going to make and export some things like ammonia, an important new zero carbon fuel, which is coming forward widely. That puts you at about $1 billion straight up for a 1.3 megaton ammonia plant. And these are good infrastructure volumes. They would allow you to decarbonize a large fraction of the hydrogen production today in Houston. They would alternatively allow you to electrify portions of the port. They would allow you to capture much, if not all, of the existing CO2 systems. And we really did look at that ammonia port because the Army Corps of Engineers had already done that for Galveston. I encourage you to take a look at these. There's a lot of detail in this particular study that gives you a sense of what the costs for such things are. The punchline here is we believe we can get 25 million tons a year of abatement at the price of about $28 billion. So I want to underscore that 25 million tons is annual capacity. So every year, Houston could be capturing and reducing its emissions by 25 megatons a year. Said simply, to get a megaton of a capacity costs a gigabuck. If you invest $1 billion, you can get $1 million a year. If that facility runs for, say, 40 years, then that cost is $25 a ton, which is a pretty good investment all around to get that kind of a capacity. Much of that investment will be private. I don't believe for a minute that the government is going to come in and pay for all of this, nor should they. It is also the case that you're going to need some public money. Public money is important to stimulate that private investment. Also, these kind of systems often cross sectors, they cross industries, they go from onshore to offshore, they go from the surface to the subsurface. That cross-chain risk is real, and government support is essential to overcome that risk. Now, the Department of Energy knows quite a bit about this. In fact, the DOE has made many, many grants over the years. Just one example is the large grants the Department of Energy made during the ARRA, the stimulus associated with 2009 and 2010. And there, basically for the money that they put out, they got between an 80 and a 95% match from industry. And that's the kind of thing we would expect here. We would expect to see something on the order of an 80% cost share from industry, but that DOE money is essential to buy down risk and manage how it works. This also matches recent estimates and expectations that have been done by other groups. One of them is the UK government, another is ExxonMobil, and it turns out we have both representatives here on the panel today in the form of Dr. Livesey and Guy Powell from Exxon. They are anticipating between a 5 times and a 10 times leverage on investment. Private money that comes forward, sorry, public money that comes forward should garner that much private investment. It's a good idea. That doesn't mean it's without challenges. Some of these challenges are pretty straightforward, like how do you site a pipeline? How do you get well permits? In fact, Texas today lacks primacy, but with HB 1284, the Texas Railroad Commission now has authority to get primacy. We'll see if they pursue it. Individual locations take money for site characterization. The Carbon Safe program at the Department of Energy is one way to think about getting that money. And there's going to be more of that in the future. An equally, if not more important dimension of this is social acceptance and public acceptance. In fact, of late, there's really special concern around questions of equity and environmental justice. Many of the facilities one would build, many of the facilities that operate today are in disadvantaged communities. And many of those communities lack voice or lack agency to express their concerns and find a happy resolution among the development. Traditionally, they have been left out of such discussions. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that will fly in the modern era. I also think many of these communities want to see the construction as much as they want to see the reduction, but they have to manifest those benefits in a way the community values. And the communities must have a voice in whether they care about pollution reduction or high wage jobs or specific services like buses and hospitals or all of these things. The communities must have that opportunity to discuss. Ultimately, all these challenges can be overcome. You need some ambition to get the job done. You need transparency so folks can see what's going on. You need to focus on the kinds of challenges I've just laid out and provide respect as well. Thankfully, there are already some government policies that help you with this. I think most in this audience are familiar with the 45Q tax credit. Today, that gives you $50 a ton for saline storage, $35 a ton for enhanced oil recovery. There's also a way to get paid with things like the low carbon fuel standard, assuming you ship the fuel to California. For tax incentives, the economic opportunity zones are definitely important and certainly relevant to Texas. These are places where new enterprises are taxed at a lower rate. Many of those are in the greater Houston area. Pasadena is a sponsor to this event. And in fact, Pasadena is an economic opportunity zone, so is the port. And in fact, there are existing policies to pay for studies, in particular front-end engineering design, FEED studies. Both the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, as well as the Office of Fossil Energy have programs to pay for that. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the Loan Program Office. They have many billions of dollars, over $10 billion of authorities for projects along these lines. Now, if this was all that was out there, we're not going to see activation. In the immortal words of Iggy Pop, we need more. So in that context, there are in fact federal legislative options that are coming forward. One of those is a competition very much like the UK competition. We estimate you need between $1.5 and $2.5 billion per hub. And so we recommend between 6 and 10 hubs. That gets you somewhere on the order of $10 to $25 billion of total money. That could be done in stages, as the UK hub is, where phase 1 provides resources to a community to do a detailed study, and then phase 2 actually sends out the money. You need to have partnerships and consortia to do this. I'm thinking in my mind about programs like the DOE Regional Partnerships for Carbon Sequestration. Very successful program. Those consortia, those partnerships really anchored the way that the money was placed and spent and brought together members of the community in a useful way. Oh, hey, wait a second. We got some of that already going. In the omnibus, in the draft infrastructure bill that came out a couple of weeks ago, President Biden, Senator Joe Manchin, Rob Portman, a bunch of people came out and said, yeah, we think we can do that. And in there is actually $8 billion for hydrogen hubs with an award of $2 billion each, which is well within our recommendations. It is also the case that they have added $3.5 billion proposal for direct air capture hubs. That would be welcome in this context to get to the net zero part. If you get the hydrogen hubs, you get a lot of reduction, but you don't get the removal, you don't get to net zero. So the direct air capture part would certainly help. And the UK is also looking at this in detail in present. It's also helpful to think about additional incentives packages. These grants, I think, will go a long way, but they're not really a business model that's sustainable. You need additional market aligning policy. There's lots of ways to do that. You can think about a production tax credit or an investment tax credits for hydrogen. They should be based on their carbon footprint. They're completely colorblind. It doesn't matter if they're blue or green or bio or nuclear or anything else. Really, if you're making low carbon hydrogen, perhaps a production tax credit would do the job. You could also enhance 45Q. These are the specific recommendations of the National Petroleum Council report, which Guy Powell played a role in. You can add extra infrastructure money like the SCALE Act. These additional incentives are going to be critical if you want liftoff. And legislators need to know that you need both of these things, both the hub infrastructure money as well as sustained market aligned incentives packages. Oh, wait a second, it looks like that's going on too. We're also seeing a live debate in the Finance Committee, in the Senate, in the House Ways and Means Committee, discussion around a reconciliation bill, including Senator Cornyn, including Senator Wyden, and these people are really trying to find a way to think about getting incentives into a reconciliation package. We'll see if they get there. It is my sincere hope they do. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that states have something to say about this too. And if the state of Texas were more proactive, that would not only help stimulate and activate the hub, they might also help them garner any federal incentives and money that come forward. And in fact, there are a lot of policies that are out there, both in the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill. I would add things like the 48C clean manufacturing tax credit, $8 billion to rebuild factory floors, make things like fuel cells and electrolyzers. There's an example of enhanced 45Q, direct pay is in one of the bills, enhanced payments up to $85 a ton is another. I've mentioned already the hubs and the SCALE Act. The Clean Futures Act in the House has money for hydrogen transportation systems, port electrification and infrastructure, and there's a whole bunch of other policies as well. Noteworthy here is the fact that the state of Texas Government Land Office has begun putting out tenders for offshore pore volume. In particular, Jefferson County is the first, won't be the last, but we're going to start seeing opportunities to use the CO2 pore volumes in a way that serve the state and serve the communities. There's a lot of specific benefits that could come from this kind of undertaking. We estimate on the order of 13,000 permanent jobs. Those are on the order of 50% to 100% above median wage. And that's consistent with work done by the Rhodium Group, by the UK government, by others to try to estimate what this looks like. As I'd mentioned before, this would be a magnet for new industry and manufacturing. Low carbon fuels in particular, I'm thinking about ammonia export, hydrogen use in the United States. And one of the things that makes Houston attractive in this regard is the extraordinary universities that are here. Rice, University of Houston, A&M, Texas Southern University. All of these universities really bring innovators, bring entrepreneurs to a hub, and a net zero hub becomes then an anchor for clean tech and carbon tech. There's economic benefits that come from this, exports, modernizing infrastructure, and creating these new industries. If you do that, you grow the tax base, you grow the school fund, and you can even get foreign direct investment from countries like Japan or Saudi Arabia or others around the world. I would mention again the infrastructure upgrades. We are beginning to see that infrastructure hardening is welcome with heat storms and storm surges and strong hurricanes and all these things. It's time to modernize and upgrade some of the infrastructure. A seawall like the Ike Dike may not do the job in this case, but as Texas learned in February of this year, it's probably a good idea to think about how climate might affect your infrastructure, and based on that, what kind of hardening and investment you want to do. Modernization and investment in a hub of this kind can help with those upgrades and help you build for the future in a way that's responsible and smart. Obviously, you get a big climate benefit here too. You will get straight up pollution reduction. This is on the just from electrifying parts of the port, using hydrogen fuel cells or ammonia fuel cells in boats, just as a way to get rid of diesel pollution and particulates. You get rid of SOx, you get rid of volatile organic carbons and particulate matter, a bunch of stuff goes away. And if you use the fuel cells, you get the nitrous oxide out of the system as well. In terms of greenhouse gas, the lowest of the low-hanging fruit is about 5 megatons a year. That's a retrofit system, but you can get an extra 20 megatons a year by a combination of repowering and retrofitting the existing system. And that's where we get the 25 megaton number from. This also then creates an opportunity to grow and develop further. The ExxonMobil proposal has a pretty expansive vision of what this would look like. And they see in the future 100 megatons of abatement associated with this kind of a hub system. And last but not least, if you have the infrastructure, if you have the clean heat, if you have the clean electricity, then you can get clean direct air capture and CO2 removal on top of it. There is an opportunity in the hubs for international engagement. We've begun that today. Thank you again, Dr. Livesey. But this is going to be done in the form of bilateral agreements. Japan, the EU, Singapore, we could be reaching out and cutting deals with groups like that. We could also have a sister city program of some case across all the US hubs. In the case of a hub in Houston, perhaps the Tees Valley or Rotterdam or Jubail would be places where you could have a sister city program of some kinds. I keep mentioning innovation because it's so important. Mission Innovation is another platform for international partnership. And in fact, the US is one of the secretariats for the carbon capture removal, CO2 removal piece. So in fact, there's a way to partner between the US and other countries specifically on the innovation components here. I cannot say this strongly enough. This is my final thought before closing up. Community engagement is just required. Community engagement is required. We have to ask communities what their interests are. If you're going to do something, you have to say, hey, we'd like to do something. What are your interests? What are your concerns? When you do that, you can't just walk in and ask. We have to create real durable platforms that give these communities voice and agency. It ain't easy, but it's required. In that discussion, I expect the conversation will identify opportunities to provide extra benefits. Those might be things like hydrogen fuel cell buses here, but it might actually just be a bus service where the community has needs. It may be using hydrogen to firm a hospital. It may be other infrastructure concerns that they have, like clean water. But you have to get into it and figure out what the communities value most so that you can come up with an idea and a plan. And that must be inclusive. It must be done in a way where the key representatives and voices of the community all have a stake and all have a desire to get to yes. Our final recommendations are in the report, and we'll be sharing the link to that report shortly. Fundamentally, Houston is very well positioned to lead a world-class hub. It has excellent natural resources, including the port itself. It has opportunities for low-cost energy and carbon capture and exports, and specific challenges are in the mix. We recommend that Congress should aggressively support development of these net zero industrial hubs nationwide. A combination of cash up front in the forms of these competitive grants augmented by market aligning policies like an amended 45Q or hydrogen production tax credit. That is true for our friends in Houston and Harris County as well. Local leaders, private and public, should lead the development of this industrial hub. They should find champions, they should create these platforms. I could go on, I would love going on, but at this point, I thank you for your time and attention and head to the panel now. All the best.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. You've laid out a very compelling case for a hub approach to industrial decarbonization. I'm sure our panelists have a lot to say in response, especially given the vantage point provided by their current roles. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel at this time. Dr. Brian E. Livesey is the Director of the Decarbonization Challenge at the UK Research and Innovation. Dr. Livesey is at the center of the UK's effort to decarbonize its industrial hubs, an approach similar to what Dr. Friedman is proposing for the US. Guy Powell is the Vice President of Planning and Business Development with ExxonMobil Low Carbon Solutions. As many of you are aware, ExxonMobil announced a couple months ago a proposal to decarbonize the Houston Ship Channel. And Dr. Jennifer Wilcox is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy at the US Department of Energy. Much of what Dr. Friedman is recommending will require significant investment by the federal government. Dr. Wilcox will share her perspectives on the DOE's role. And finally, our moderator for the discussion is Bobby Tudor, Chairman of Tudor Pickering Holt & Company. Bobby, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining us this morning. This is obviously highly topical for us, not just here in Houston, but around the world. So I have a question here that will be directed to all the panelists, and we're going to ask Dr. Wilcox perhaps to answer first. Carbon capture and sequestration is not a new technology per se. It's really been around for decades. Why now? What's different, and what makes it different this time? Dr. Wilcox, we might start with you.
Sure, thank you so much. It's a great question. I would start by saying that we are out of time in terms of climate. It used to be that if we simply avoid carbon emissions in the first place, that could get us there, but we have failed to do that at the scale that we need to. So not only do we need to do deep decarbonization to meet our climate goals, but recent reports really from the Royal Society on greenhouse gas removal, and also the National Academy of Sciences of Engineering and Medicine on negative emissions tell us that we need to deep decarbonize in addition to taking carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere. And so we need to do both of these things in parallel in order to meet our carbon goals, carbon zero goals. The other thing is, I'll just say too, the current administration in the US has made a net zero carbon emissions goals by 2050. And in reaching that, they've also set forth two additional goals. One is that we have to reduce by 50% our 2005 emissions over the next 8 years. So 8 years, 2030, in order to reduce our emissions in the United States, half of what we were emitting in 2005. And the second goal is 100% clean electricity by 2035. So if we can hit these targets, then we could be on our way to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Not only the administration, but also we've seen a lot of activity, just states in the United States. So for instance, California and others are recognizing that we need to have net zero carbon emissions goals. Also, you see a lot of corporations recognizing that we need to reduce. And they are looking for low carbon supply chains, whether it's fuels associated with aviation, or maybe it's steel, cement. And we need to be able to supply these supply chains so that corporations can also meet their net zero targets. And so I think we're at a stage where it's just like we're out of time. We're seeing changes in climate every day. We're experiencing them. And we also have this technology. It's a technology that exists today. And we need to be at a stage where we, from the Department of Energy's perspective, invest in planting seeds and leveraging opportunities like this one in Houston and other hubs so that we can be on the road to commercializing these technologies so that they are economically viable. I will also say too that we have policies that Julio went through. So 45Q is starting to, you see some stimulating some energy around that in terms of low-hanging fruit associated with carbon capture. What I mean by that is emission sources that are more concentrated today. So things like bioethanol, also hydrogen production, processing of natural gas. These are examples where the CO2 is more concentrated. We absolutely should be capturing the CO2 and injecting it deep underground so that we can have impact on climate. And so I think that, really we just are recognizing that we're out of time. We're seeing some policy. Hopefully we'll see more, an expansion of the policy that we already have in the United States. And the good news is we have the technology available. We just need to increase the scale of deployment.
And thank you. And Guy Powell, if I'm not mistaken, if you look at all the carbon that's been captured and sequestered, at least in the United States in the past several decades, ExxonMobil has actually done a very large percentage of it. So your company knows and understands this technology. Why now for a project of this scale, of the type that Exxon has suggested?
Yeah, sure. And similar to Dr. Wilcox, what we see is not just a single thing, but it's more of a convergence of factors that suggest now is the time that there might be the political and public will to make something like this happen. First of all, what I think all of us have experienced is an increase in public sentiment that that more action needs to be taken on climate change, and specifically see this in countries like Northwest Europe, some countries in Asia, Canada, and arguably here in the US. And you see this manifest itself in a lot of the international or country commitments that have made to net zero emissions by 2050 and other type pretty aggressive commitments. So I think it's a change in public sentiment. And what the second thing I think we've seen is a desire or apparent willingness of policymakers to actually put it into policy frameworks and incentives to make something like this happen. Julio referenced the work that's going on around Washington around 45Q. That's just one example that's happening throughout the world. But I think we are encouraged that there is going to be the political will to put the right incentive structures in place to make this a commercially viable venture. And then lastly, what I would mention, what we've also seen is the emergence of a tremendous amount of money that's basically sitting on the sideline waiting for investment in these type, of ESG investments. That said, investors are going to want returns, which comes back to why the incentive structure from policy is so incredibly important. So you put all those things together, and that's our view on why is it the right time? It's the convergence of those things we think that can make something like Houston happen.
Great, thank you. Dr. Livesey, in March of this year, the UK published its industrial decarbonization strategy. I think the first one really published by a major government. You were right in the middle of all that and understand it, I think, quite completely. What are some of the lessons learned from your experience and the experience of the team that put together that industrial decarbonization strategy? And what can we learn in the US and specifically in Houston from that process?
Well, it's perhaps a bit early to say that we're able to learn lessons, but we certainly do have this in place, and we're really pleased to be taking the decarbonisation strategy forward. I think the thing we have learned so far is that we thought there would be real value in decarbonising industrial hubs, and we're actually seeing that in the way things are developing. So within the industrial decarbonisation challenge that I lead, we expected there to be a lot of industries bidding into the program to decarbonise their process, and we do have that, but we've also seen a lot of major investment in, for example, new power production with carbon capture and storage and hydrogen production. And what these big projects do is give a almost instant scale to the cluster, which is really helpful for all the other industries that need to get involved. I think the other thing that I have found particularly interesting to see how it's developed, and I think has been very valuable, is that we've been developing the policy and the economic support at exactly the same time as starting the work on doing the engineering design of these big projects. A lot of people thought the policy should all come first and get fully worked through, and then we start the work, but actually it's been very effective to really be able to engage industry and the people who want to build these projects directly with the policy developers. And I think it's provided really good engagement, and it has helped provide a real impetus for getting these supporting models right and things that industry is going to value, rather than them just being policy that doesn't really incentivize action. Thanks.
That's interesting. So the thinking there is that policy doesn't have to come first. It should come parallel in some sense with the work of industry and planning the projects. That's a very interesting perspective and helpful. Guy, back to you. The big news, not just in Houston, but around the world, if you will, is this ambitious project that ExxonMobil is suggesting, $100 billion in size, focused on the Houston Ship Channel complex. Could you give us an update on the project, on ExxonMobil's thinking, and sort of where you are in the planning process? And maybe to follow on this last question with Dr. Livesey, a word or two about the engagement with policymakers as well, and what's important from your perspective to kind of get in place to allow this project to happen.
You're muted there.
Sorry about that. But first of all, we are super excited about the prospect of developing this concept here in Houston. And similar to what was just mentioned, that the approach we're taking is that we are going through if you will, the facilities design and development of the project, quite frankly, in the absence of policy. So we're taking a similar approach to what is going on in the UK. The policies hopefully being developed, we're developing the physical concept, and hopefully these things will come together at some point in the very, very near future. We've made a fair amount of progress on, again, developing the facilities design and basis, be it the CO2 collection systems to individual industrial sources, as well as the trunk lines that would ultimately go offshore. And I'm particularly encouraged with the work that we've done in the offshore subsurface. We've done a fair amount of work and are really encouraged with the quality of the geology that we're seeing and the potential for very, very large scale subsurface storage. The other thing that we've been very engaged in is getting with and contacting those companies that have the largest manufacturing base within the Houston area. We're targeting generally those companies, those 15 companies that have the largest manufacturing base within Houston. I'd say we've made contact with the vast majority of them and have been very encouraged by the discussions we've had and the willingness to potentially participate in something like this. And then the last thing that you mentioned, we've done a fair amount of work on the policy and advocacy side, not only at the local level, but at the state level, and particularly at the federal level. And quite frankly, we're pretty encouraged with what we're seeing at the federal level, with the potential to expand 45Q into something we think that will be needed in order to make Houston a reality, as well as what Julio mentioned, and I totally agree with, it can't be just one funding or one mechanism to make this happen. For various reasons, I think you need an injection of money into the transport and storage infrastructure, and I think you need another mechanism to incentivize the construction and operation of the actual capture facilities.
And as a follow-on to that, Dr. Livesay, what have been your experiences in working with the industrial players, the companies in the UK model, if you will, and does that differ at all from what you think ultimately will be done in the US? Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I think it certainly is a challenge working with some of the companies we have involved in our programs. We've got a lot of major global oil and gas companies involved, for example. And what we're seeing is that we do need to work quite hard to make sure that we influence them to deliver what the UK is hoping to deliver for itself. But I think what I would reflect on is that if we take the example of Teesside that we just heard about briefly, there was originally a project plan for that region around a new power plant being developed by a consortium of oil and gas companies. And what we've been able to do is work with them to encourage them to think about what we need for the region as a whole. And I think they would agree with me when I say that the project itself is now much stronger than it started out, because they've got so much stronger regional engagement. All the industries in the region understand how they might be able to tap into the infrastructure that's going to be built. It doesn't feel remote from the region. It's much grounded in what people want. And I think that's been a real strength of what we've been able to do recently.
And has it been difficult to get the companies to work together? You heard Guy mention they're in contact with the 15 largest players. Ultimately, this is going to require a degree of collaboration that may feel a bit foreign, if you will, to some companies. What's your experience in that regard?
We are finding a degree of cooperation that we haven't seen before. I think people do recognize that this is a global challenge and people do need to work together. Obviously, there are some elements of projects that are commercially sensitive and hard to share. But generally, I think the level of cooperation has been very good and very much welcomed.
And Guy, has that been your experience thus far as well?
Thus far, that's been the case.
Yeah,
we've seen much more. We've been very, very encouraged by the level of cooperation that we've seen and the willingness to participate from the companies we've talked to.
Great. So, Dr. Wilcox, you've now heard we've heard Dr. Friedman's kind of take on the opportunity for such a hub in the U.S. and in Houston specifically. We've heard from Dr. Livesay about the UK plan. What's your take on this whole notion of industrial hubs, and what do you see as the challenges and concerns, if you will, not necessarily just the hurdles, but kind of fundamentally what needs to happen for these hubs to work from your perspective?
Sure. First, I'll say, the hubs are a great place to start. Looking at where the CO2 emissions are located and co-locating, the advancement of capture with reliable storage, where you can put carbon dioxide in the ground today, in the absence of significant infrastructure build out like long pipelines. So looking at the synergies of the capture facilities coupled to dedicated storage is a great place to start. And the nice thing about this too is that the CO2 sources are different. You have a variety of sources, which means you have a variety of approaches and you're not putting your eggs all in one basket. And so I think that the hub concept is where we need to begin. And this isn't the only one in the United States, but there's a lot of opportunities for this type of activity. But it's great here. We've got industry that's willing to lean in, right, and start first really here. And so the thing I would say about the challenge is going to be making sure that the steps taken are transparent to the public, in making sure and Julio outlined this really well in the presentation, better than I've seen before actually. And that is just engaging in the frontline communities and finding out, listening to the concerns of those communities, the folks that are living in the communities at the fence line. Sure, jobs is a big piece of this, and that's a great way to communicate, the benefits to communities. But the reality is that there are communities that have been pushing back against our dependence on fossil fuels and the legacy that fossil fuels have had. And we want to be able to show that we can use fossil fuels responsibly and that we can minimize the environmental impacts. We have the technology to do this. And so by understanding what concerns are, whether it's air pollution, whether it's clean water, whether it's access to clean and affordable electricity, and then this hub concept, until I read the report, I didn't realize it's not just about CCS. It's about other pieces too. It's about clean electricity from renewables. It's about not just blue hydrogen, but green hydrogen, pink too. Sounds like all the colors are invited. And so, given that, you can be very strategic about how it's deployed. Because if you're in one location and you have a fossil fuel fired, a power plant that may not make economic sense to deploy CCS, well, maybe that's the opportunity where you bring in the renewable-based electricity. There's strategy, I think, that is going to have to be really key to how it's deployed, and that involves bringing the frontline communities to the table and being part of the conversation to deploy. And that really hasn't been done effectively in the past, and I think this could be a way where we could get started doing it in the right way. And then I think too, that will lead to a sustainable project. And that's what we need in order to achieve net zero by 2050. It's projects that don't last 4 years, but projects that last throughout. So.
And Guy Powell, I'm sure ExxonMobil is very aware of this issue. The communities in the Houston Ship Channel area will have strong opinions, I think, and a lot to say ultimately about the development of this hub. What's ExxonMobil's perspective on engaging those communities and making sure that their concerns are heard and acted upon?
I'll echo most of what has been said. It's going to be absolutely essential that we do that. And as we look at specific communities, you have to look at the specific needs and issues in those communities. This is not a very generic thing. This is something you have to go in and be very specific on what is that community needing or desiring, or what issues do they have. So I think tailoring our approach to a specific community is going to be extraordinarily important. We do this all over the world when we go into frontier countries, et cetera. So we have a lot of experience in doing this, but you have to be very cognizant and very disciplined and be very purposeful when you look at these type of things.
And Dr. Livesey, in the UK plan, how central is this issue to the broader plan at Teesside in particular?
It is very central. We recognize that we have to take the public with us, because ultimately, one way or another, the public's going to be paying the costs of this. So we have made it at the heart of our program that we encourage all our projects to think about diversity and inclusion, that they think about how they're going to present the projects to the public. And we do recognize that a lot of companies, when they're presenting big projects, tend to just do that on the basis of, we're going to bring loads of jobs, it's going to be good for you. And that isn't really enough. when we're talking about decarbonising whole regions, we know the public cares about how this is going to be done. So we are doing some research into what sort of messages might be influential with people, but all our projects recognise this is really important to get right.
Great. So, Dr. Wilcox and Dr. Livesey, and then I'll ask Guy to comment at the end. You've heard a bit about how Houston, our region, is thinking about the global energy transition broadly, and specifically as it regards this issue around industrial decarbonization and a hub. What would your recommendations, be to us here in Houston as we embark on this path? We feel like we have some inherent kind of built-in advantages, if you will. Yet at the same time, we also have areas where we clearly need a lot more work and a lot more attention. We'd be interested, if you will, here in those of us are Houstonians, to hear your perspective on what might be the top 2 or 3 things that we should focus on. Why don't we start with you, Dr. Wilcox?
Sure. I think that it's going to be important. Again, I'll mention transparency, and I don't mean just for the public locally, but we need more than this. We need a lot more than this, and this is really just a start. And there are some areas where hubs make sense too. Example is like Ohio River Valley, for instance, in the Appalachian region could make a lot of sense. Louisiana could make a lot of sense. And they may not have the same type of resources that Houston does. And so I think being able to be transparent about the lessons learned, the challenges and that you're facing as you're moving forward, how you overcome those challenges, and really documenting that in a way so that other regions can learn from you really being the first to kind of push this forward. And I think that would be very, very useful for the regions that, that aren't necessarily have the same types of resources to lean in early like Houston is doing.
Great. Dr. Livesey, your perspective?
I think we started out by talking about what's different about CCS this time. And in the UK, we've had a lot of failed competitions and startups too. As a result of the learning we did around that, we managed to convince ourselves in the UK that the most important thing for getting costs down was to share knowledge and transfer that knowledge. So my main message would be to really try to learn from others who are doing things like this. And please share what you are learning yourselves. Until I was introduced to some of the people working in this area by our British consulate, I've got literally no idea how much we have got in common in terms of the projects in the UK and what you're thinking about in Houston. So please do think about what we could share with each other. Thank you.
And Guy, finally from you, ExxonMobil does business all over the world, including in many of the other industrial hubs around the world. Your company decided that its first big project in this regard would be in the Houston Ship Channel. So why? What do you see as sort of the advantages, if you will, that we have here, and what do you see as the quite specific challenges?
What we see in Houston is what Julio talked about. You have this very unique situation where you've got a large concentration of CO2 sources in very close proximity to probably one of the best, if not the best, storage resource in the world. So you've got a very unique set of circumstances to be able to physically link those things. As we look at doing that, we don't really see huge technical challenges in doing that, either installing the carbon capture equipment or the pipelines or the wells and the injection, et cetera, et cetera. It comes more in my mind back to the policy incentive and structures that are in place in order to incentivize that. And that's just not about the money. There's other things that need to be worked on the regulatory and legal perspective as well. But if I look at what it's going to take for something like Houston to happen, I think it's going to be either be a collective push from local, state, and federal governments to put the policy incentives and structures in place.
Well, thank you, Guy, and thank you also, Dr. Wilcox and Dr. Livesey, for all of these thoughts and comments. This is a very exciting This is very exciting part of the world and part of the whole global energy transition that's very, very important to the world, and we think quite important to Houston and to our region. So thanks so much for your input and expertise, and we look forward to continuing to engage with you as time goes on. Jenny?
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you to our panelists and Dr. Friedman. What we heard through this morning's discussion is that it's both Houston's opportunity and responsibility to lead in the global energy transition. We have the infrastructure, the knowledge, and the workforce necessary to bring low carbon solutions to scale and solve for one of the world's most urgent challenges. The partnership believes in this initiative and the opportunity it brings. Our goal is to help connect the dots and encourage collaboration among the organizations who can be solutions partners in the transition. The partnership will also continue to work to attract new businesses and investment to the region that want to take advantage of the know-how, infrastructure, and robust testing ground that only Houston can offer. With a common platform of understanding in place, we are already beginning to see the collisions happening among players large and small that will help us achieve our goals. I invite you to rejoin us at 10:30 for our Energy Transition Inspiration sessions, where we'll discuss some of the specific ecosystem building opportunities that will help strengthen Houston's advantage across multiple energy value chains. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Houston. I am Dhiren Sethia, South Energy Transition and Sustainability Lead at Accenture. On behalf of Accenture, I'm excited to be here as we uncover Houston's place in the future of global energy. How we, as an industry, come together to transform Houston into the energy transition capital of the world is absolutely critical. What we are facing together is a total reinvention of our industry and our city. Reinvention means reconsidering what we do, what we stand for, how we compete, how we measure and deliver value to our customers, investors, employees, and really the society in general, all in the low carbon world. At Accenture, we believe there are no winner-take-all strategies in energy transition. We believe in an all-of-the-above approach, one that unites various business models, industries, and technologies. Houston, our journey to reinvention starts now, and Accenture will be there every step of the way.
You light our homes, keep us warm.
You help us explore, innovate, and achieve the unthinkable.
You are everywhere.
Yet, sometimes out of reach.
You move us forward and bring us together.
And together, we're on a journey towards the future of energy.
So what will it look like?
It's hard to say, but we know it will be sustainable and abundant.
We're already on our way.
With a common purpose, each of us playing our part.
At Deloitte, we're connecting every bright mind, every organization, every startup, every innovator.
Every citizen, CEO, and regulator.
Making this future happen won't be easy, so we're developing practical solutions.
And a clear roadmap to help our clients on their way.
We'll keep making those connections.
Each step well planned, moving forward together.
To make our new energy future a reality. Let's connect for a new energy future.
Houston is home to Chevron's largest employee base in the world. To sustain our region as the energy capital of the world and establish Houston as the new energy transition capital of the world, Chevron is helping to build a robust Houston innovation ecosystem. Hello, I'm Jesus Lopez, Digital Manager at Chevron. To grow this innovation ecosystem, Chevron supports Houston-based startups and collaborates with the investment community, universities, accelerators, and incubators. We believe that it is the responsibility of the region's energy industry to continue a legacy of developing innovative technologies, and Chevron will play a leadership role. Houston is the city best suited to tackle energy challenges. Houston is the epicenter of the energy industry, and Chevron is committed to advancing the region as a leader in the energy transition.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Greater Houston Partnership and Center for Houston's Futures presentation of the Future of Global Energy, presented by Chevron. Please join us in thanking the following conference sponsors for the support of this event and dedication to strengthening Houston's role in leading the energy transition. The Future of Global Energy presenting sponsor, Chevron. Our Day 2 Reinventing to Lead the Energy Transition sponsor, Accenture. The Day 3 Creating Houston's New Hydrogen Economy sponsor, Deloitte. At the gold level, the 23rd World Petroleum Congress, Bechtel Oil, Gas and Chemicals, BP America Inc., ConocoPhillips, Ernst & Young LLP, ExxonMobil Corporation, Halliburton Labs, RSM US LLP, Sempra Energy, Shell Oil Company. Today's silver sponsors, Baker Tilly US LLP, BDO, Burns and McDonnell Inc., Calpine Corporation, CenterPoint Energy, Cheniere Energy Inc., Cognite, McDermott, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Pasadena Economic Development Corporation, Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman LLP, Tudor Pickering Holt & Company. Our bronze level sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, Energy Corridor, Haynes and Boone LLP, Slalom, Targa Resources Corporation, and Conference Information Card Underwriter, PNC Bank. Thank you as well to the following partners for their support in making the future of global energy possible. Strategy partner, McKinsey & Company. Executive production partner, Ward and Ames Special Events. And transportation partner, Metro. The Greater Houston Partnership would also like to thank its 2021 signature sponsors. These sponsors provide generous annual commitments that support the partnership in delivering hundreds of events, business resource groups, and meetups to its members. Center for Houston's Future event and programs throughout the year are made possible in part by generous ongoing support from our annual sponsors. The Greater Houston Partnership and Center for Houston's Future would also like to extend a special thank you to their respective board members and member companies for their ongoing dedication to advancing the partnership and center's missions. We would also like to acknowledge members of Houston's Consular Corps for their work in positioning Houston as a great global city and strengthening international business relations across the world. Finally, we acknowledge the elected officials that represent the Greater Houston region at the local, state, and federal level for their leadership and commitment to our region. Please join us in thanking all that have made the inaugural Future of Global Energy possible.
Good morning and welcome back to Day 2 of the Future of Global Energy Conference. For those just joining us, my name is Jenny Phillip and I am the Chief Strategy Officer for the Greater Houston Partnership. As most of you have heard yesterday and earlier this morning, no other place on earth is better suited than Houston to chart the course toward realizing a low carbon world. This is achievable if we work together. This session is about changing our mindsets and inspiring a different way of thinking about how we and Houston will lead the energy transition. Now I'd like to introduce Dhiren Satya, Managing Director and South Energy Transition and Sustainability Lead for Accenture, to say a few words. Thank you, Dhiren, and thanks to Accenture for helping make today possible.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you to Bob Harvey, Bobby Tudor, Jenny, and the rest of the GHP team for putting together this very relevant, productive, and purposeful conversation on the future of global energy. I'm excited to welcome all of you to engage for the next 90 minutes in inspiration sessions to get in the reinvention mindset. Through conversations with several key industry players and experts, we want to delve into some of the specific topics that Bobby laid out in Houston's energy transition strategy yesterday. Things like cross-industry innovation, workforce skilling, and attracting funding, talent, and startups to Houston. Let me share a few thoughts before we start. The cross-industry global energy transition journey is about 10 years old. The challenges have been acknowledged and the opportunities verified, which is to say that the foundational thinking and some of the arguing is done. Now is the time and the window for action. Accenture has been engaged in this journey from the start, helping clients navigate the pathway to meet organizational and national net zero strategies and decarbonization commitments. We partnered with the World Economic Forum to publish Energy Transition Index 10th Anniversary Report. Our widely publicized research focused on oil and gas industry, aptly named Decarbonizing Energy from A to Zero, defines the 3 archetypes for successful energy companies of the future. So what have we learned from all this? What is the answer? We believe that there are no winner-take-all strategies or any silver bullets. Various technologies are at different points of development, and sometimes they're hype cycles. In fact, the answer is not just what we do, but how we do it. While electrification is the linchpin and storage is an important piece of the puzzle, this is really a techno-economic challenge with many unresolved questions. Now, every company is going to invest and place bets based on its strategy and core competencies. But there are some fundamental things that will be important industry-wide. First, we must clean the core, minimize emissions, clean the supply chain, and incorporate energy efficiencies in our own operations. In other words, the energy industry and Houston must show up now. We must be transparent and show with actions that this is more than just placating regulators and investors. Second, to be the future energy transition leaders, we must embrace and accelerate the transition by being leaders in proven clean energy and low carbon systems, investing in fiscally responsible abatement projects. And finally, we must innovate and extend the frontier. This is where the climate tech ecosystem plays a vital role. And a small footnote here. Oil prices stabilizing at about $70 a barrel is perhaps the best thing that can happen for this journey of energy transition. And the fact that in the US, shale producers will make a projected $30 billion in profit is a great opportunity for the right investments in climate tech, clean tech, and energy transition to happen. At the end of the day, the answer that emerges is all of the above. What does that mean? It means a future where we have created energy supply that's sustainable and responsible, resilient and dependent, and affordable and equitable. It means digitally sophisticated demand response and optimization systems. It means safe and robust energy storage and transport systems and technologies. Circular supply chains that put an emphasis on sustainability. And like we heard this morning, earlier today, carbon removal technologies that can be cost effectively scaled. All this is going to have to be supported by carbon pricing and offset markets that are transparent and liquid, and along with the right regulatory frameworks like 45Q and others, with investments from public and private sources. Of course, we all understand that hydrocarbons will continue to be a critical part of our future in any scenario. with winners that operate in a transparent, clean, and responsible way. So the question of the day is, how can Houston play a significant role in all these areas? What does all this mean for the energy companies and us professionals that call it home? There's consensus now that global energy demand over the next 3 decades is going to increase only marginally, and the share of fossil fuel supply is going to go down. In other words, things that we are known for and we are good at may be less in demand, and reinventing, reskilling, and rebranding will be extremely important. We are certainly not behind. As the speakers before me have noted, we have a whole lot going for us in terms of infrastructure, engineering talent, and the wildcatter risk-taking aptitude. In fact, we may be ahead in a lot of ways. However, there is a range of right and wrong answers, which means that execution is key, which also means that taking our people along this journey is critical. Bobby spoke of the opportunity before us yesterday, that with the right actions, we can see new energy job growth in Houston. How is that going to happen? In addition to attracting new talent and retraining our current workforce, we must think differently to include a whole new generation of workers via apprenticeship programs and aligning with local universities and community colleges. As leaders, we need to rethink our leadership principles and continue to make Houston an inclusive environment where women and minorities thrive in leadership roles. We need to focus on making Houston the intellectual capital of the world when it comes to energy transition, just like we have been for oil and gas. Data shows that over the next decade, say by 2030, energy capital investments grow at the rate of 2.5% per year, while renewable investments over the same period grow roughly by 9% a year. That comes at the expense of oil and gas investments. Storage, hydrogen, carbon removal technologies are all tagged for significant investment flow, as we heard this morning. As are technologies needed to manage, monitor, and abate emissions. What is going to be Houston's share, and how can we influence that? We can influence that by being bold, innovative, and having a plan. And thanks to the Greater Houston Partnership's efforts, we have one. Houston has long invested in our innovation ecosystem, and now is the time to double down on that, investing not just in technology innovation, but commercial and business innovation. We need to continue to look at bold moves and technology moonshots, even as we leverage our strengths like the port, the ship channel, the petrochemical complex, and a business-friendly environment. So in conclusion, nothing short of reinvention will do. Reinvention means reconsidering what we do and how we do it. It also means cross-industry collaboration and reinventing how our customers, employees, financial markets, and indeed the world sees us. We have to get in the reinvention mindset. Let's jumpstart that process with the candid and insightful discussions with several industry leaders and experts in the next 3 upcoming sessions, followed by engaging and interactive segments where we'll ask each of you as the audience to weigh in with your thoughts on the topic. Using Menti, we'll be able to see in real time how each of us are thinking about energy transition today and into the future. You'll see Menti instructions on the screen right now for how to join us on Menti. We'll bring these instructions up before each Menti segment, but now is also a great time to get logged in so you're ready to join us as soon as discussions wrap up. We'll also be moderating the chat and QA windows for any questions you may have, which may make an appearance in the last 15 minutes of today's discussion when we revisit some of the great things we plan to hear and learn today. So without further delay, let me turn it over to Jenny to get us started.
Thanks, Duran. Really looking forward to hearing from the experts you have lined up in these next 3 segments, as well as from our audience. So let's get started. Our first segment is focused on bold innovations and cross-industry pilots. Please join me in welcoming Mani Pendwani, Managing Director at Accenture, and Vijay Swarup, Vice President of Research and Development at ExxonMobil.
Thank you, Jenny, and what a great start, Dhiren. And Vijay, I'm just so glad to have you here with us today to talk about a major component that's driving this energy transition, that of bold innovation and cross-industry pilots. Before we get into our fireside chat, I thought I'd maybe open it up to you to maybe provide some comments and your perspectives.
Well, first off, Manny, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this session. And what an exciting session I'm anticipating. The morning today was fantastic with the concepts that were introduced. It's a time for innovation. It's a time for technology, and I look forward to chatting with you over the next few minutes about the role of innovation in this space.
Excellent. So let's dive in. And Sean, my first question to you as we talk about this topic is, how do you see the energy industry, of today and then transitioning into the energy industry of the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let's just start with some basics here, which is energy is always evolving, and in fact, the way we execute energy today is quite different than how we did it 30 plus years ago when I started. And the things that we're doing today, quite frankly, were unimaginable when I started. And so this is a technical industry. It is probably the one industry that requires the integration of every science, math, physics, chemistry, as well as every engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering, electrical engineering. So this is an innovation industry. It's a technology industry. And so we've always been in this state of evolution. It's always been about, at the core of what we try to do, it is scalable, affordable, reliable energy. That is what people want. They want power, they want transportation fuel. They want it now in a form that reduces emissions. That's what we're focused on. The way to do that, of course, is to do what you can do today, which is what the speakers have already talked about today, and the Houston Hub is a perfect example of that. So you've got to do what you can do today, while you also have to be a little bit humble and say there's better ways to do it as well. So we have an existing technology set, which I think has to be used, but we also have to understand where the technology gaps are. And that's what drives our research. Where do we need technology, and how do we help facilitate the transition by focusing on where the technology gaps are and building the research to try to address those technology gaps.
Awesome. Now your focus, huge focus on technology, and a huge, as you say, it's evolving over your 30 years that you've been involved in the industry. And your focus specifically has been at ExxonMobil on future technology. And as you said, there are gaps, right? So where do you see the greatest technology gaps today?
Yeah, so let's just again start with just a couple of basics here, right? One, we are a very technical company. And while technology has changed over the past 30 years, fundamentals don't. Thermodynamics is still thermodynamics. Newton's law, still Newton's law. Physics, math, all stay the same. Okay, so you start with fundamentals. And then you try to apply those. Our research objective is to be capability, fundamental focused, and then apply those capabilities where we see the need for solutions. Our focus right now is on the harder to decarbonize areas. And you heard about that again with the Houston Hub concept, which is largely the industrial sector, where you have emissions of CO2 because they're high heat, high energy intensive conversion processes, whether it's steel, refining, chemicals, et cetera. Those are going to require rethinking how we do that. And then aviation fuel, jet fuel, marine fuel, where you need an energy density to propel those things. So where we have solutions, we should be prosecuting them. Where we need solutions, we should be researching them. And so our research is on the tougher to decarbonize areas, where we think our capabilities and our fundamental focus and our discipline in how we do research can ultimately provide the solutions. And again, the key to the solutions, it's got to be scalable. You've heard the word scale a number of times during this conference already. The scale of energy is almost unimaginable. And so as we're looking at where we want to focus our research, hard to decarbonize, pathway to scale solutions.
Okay. So would you say that when you're now approaching, the technology and the innovation challenge, which, you mentioned certain gap areas around focus on decarbonization, obviously
Right.
some of the basics and the fundamentals remain the same, but it's the application of technology. How has that changed your approach?
Well, that's a really good question because it's very hard to put a timeline on innovation. What you can do, though, is think about how you do the innovation. And again, one of the key themes to this conference is one of collaboration. And so what you can do is start to rethink collaboration and rethink the way you move technologies, how you deploy technologies, how you move technologies down a cost curve. And so doing things more in parallel rather than in series. So instead of going from A to B to C to D, which is a way to do it, it's probably the longer way to do it, start doing things in parallel, A, B, C, D. Again, tying back to the discussion this morning, that was one of the themes that came out. There are technologies there. There are things you can do today. Let's do them. Let's recognize where we have to continue to work. Let's think about that as well. And if we can start doing parallel processing, and that cuts across not just how you innovate and how you drive innovation, but it's also how you collaborate. So let's get the right people in the room earlier in the process. And again, if you look at what's being talked about in this conference, that's one of the themes. And in the R&D space, in the technology space, that's academia, that's national labs, that's industry, that's small companies. How do we get to where people that are bringing the key capabilities to this space come in, and where companies like ours play a role is we can participate in all of those areas. Because we're a research company, because we're fundamentals, we can engage with academics, we can engage with the national labs. We also have line of sight to scale. That is such an important part to try to shape the research and make one of the decision points on what you decide to do research on, scalability. Scalability has two components. One is size. Does it have the magnitude? The other is geographic application. So to be scalable, in my opinion, you want to look to see how broadly can it be deployed. That's where carbon capture, CO2, that is geographically deployable. Houston has some advantages that were talked about, but we also heard about the UK. We also heard about the European hubs. And so, but the carbon capture technology, that is something that can be broadly deployed. And so, so that's where we try to focus. And that's a way to think about how we shape and reshape the way we innovate. Can't change innovation. What you can change is how you're trying to drive innovation.
Excellent. Love that response. Now, moving a little bit from, obviously the theme of scalability, but then you talked about collaboration.
Right.
Can you bring a little bit of the Houston perspective on, how, that approach to your innovation ties in, and how can the industry then, work with the city to lead the innovation that is required for energy transition?
Well, let's talk about Houston and talk about Houston and innovation, because there are two other industries in Houston that also benefit from innovation. One is medicine and the other is space. And so Houston has innovation in its very fabric. And when you think about the things that I just talked about, which is academic collaboration, Houston has two leading universities, the University of Houston and Rice University. It is very close distance, the University of Texas and Texas A&M. So you do have a collaboration at the academic level that is pretty strong. You also have a wide range of scale companies. So you have the small innovators, and we talked earlier today about the need for more innovations and more small startups, okay? And then you also have companies like ourselves that have a large footprint in the Houston area that can help understand that pathway to scale. You couple that with the other components, like a city government that is very much driving innovation and very much interested in working, and you have a different dimension of collaboration. So I would say Houston has a unique opportunity, given the very fabric of Houston and innovation, and the fact that we've been innovating in the energy space for a long, long time in this area, to just really catalyze the innovation, to try, again, can't speed it, but you can speed how you do it. And that's one of the keys. And I think Houston has a inherent advantage in trying to do that.
So given that bedrock of, you talked about the universities and the academia present, you talked about a wide range of industry, and again, the topic is cross industry. So you obviously highlighted a couple of others, medicine space and others that are, part of that fabric of Houston. What in your mind are then some of the key enablers that Houston you think will need to succeed?
Well, I think huge enablers, let's think about what's needed to actually do what we want to do. And it's a triangle. There's three things that in some ways are in equilibrium with each other. You have technology, you have policy, and you have infrastructure. And what equilibrium means is when one of the three is set, the other two are then constrained. And so what we really want to do is not constrain until it's time to constrain. So policies that are agnostic on technology will help drive wider ranges of innovation. Technologies that can cut across various sectors of the energy challenge are probably more likely technologies. That's carbon capture. CO2 removal is agnostic to how the CO2 was made. And you already heard in the discussion earlier this morning that the CO2 source from industrial sectors has a fairly wide range. The CO2 quality from power sector is a fairly narrow range. So what you have is you have an opportunity in Houston with the range of CO2, with the range of options to when we say CO2 capture, we're really talking about CO2 separation. You're trying to separate the CO2 from whatever else it's in, concentrate it so it can be safely sequestered. And I think, so when you think about that, you think about how do we get those technologies? But again, understanding the various equilibriums, technology, policy, infrastructure, understanding how these can all fit together and having the conversation. These sessions that we're having today are critical. We've got to get the people that we all have a common mission here. We want to deliver affordable, scalable, reliable energy while addressing the risks of climate change. We all have a common theme here. We all have different roles to play. We all have different capabilities, but having these forums like this to talk about how we do it, to talk about how we prosecute it, and aligning on how we do this, finding common themes, and then going there, and then challenging how we do things to constantly get better. That's what energy's been doing for 130 years. It's what energy is going to continue to be doing. We have an opportunity here to accelerate and drive the innovation, and that's certainly what motivates me as a researcher.
Fantastic. So, Vijay, evolving technology, things are changing, fundamentals remain the same. The focus is around decarbonization, innovation at scale. Houston is well set with the overall, academia and other cross-industry presence that benefit, and then a focus on technology, policy, and infrastructure. What a fantastic perspective in such a short amount of time. Really appreciate it. And let's now see if we can open it up to the audience to see, what their, input on some of these questions might be. So let's get Menti up, and I hope everybody's, gone into the screen that was highlighted earlier. Okay. So we can move to the first question if everybody's in. Okay, so the first question, which of today's energy transition solutions are the lowest hanging fruits for cross-industry collaboration in Houston? Okay, we have a few responses. CCUS leading the way. Okay, looks like most people believe it's the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So, all right, we'll move on to the next one. Which markets should be prioritized for collaborative energy transition solutions? All right. And the winner is refining and petrochemicals. Vijay, any of these striking you as off your perspective, or?
Well, I think when you look at this particular chart, what it tells you is, and you think about this audience, which is probably largely Houston, it's not surprising that you would see transportation, refining, and residential. I think it also speaks to areas where we have some technology. I mean, we are constantly looking for efficiency in refining and chemicals, but it's also acknowledgement that there's a partial solution set and a need for more technology. And again, the way to drive the technology is through the collaboration. So I think it's reinforcing some of the things we talked about, Manny, and I'm not necessarily surprised by those three being the leading vote getter.
All right, moving on to the third one. Rank the importance of the following for improving cross-industry collaboration for the energy transition. This one's a sliding scale. Creating an integrated view, developing a common infrastructure for scaling, sharing ideas, technology, and innovation among stakeholders, and pooling investment and risk capital. All right. Looked like 3 of them are biting for the first top spot. Pooling investment and risk capital, always important. All right, no, this one I personally felt, yeah, this all of the above would have been the right response. Vijay is at least.
I mean, Manny, that was essentially what the panel this morning talked about.
Yes, exactly.
Right, those were the 4 elements that Julio and others spoke about this morning.
Absolutely. Yep, that's right. Okay, moving on to the next one, 4th question. What new forums and mandates are most important for delivering greater cross-industry energy transition collaboration? Again, this one, obviously is a one that I would, personally think all 4 would be the most important ones. Vijay, any perspectives from you? But you talked.
Yeah, I look at the 2 that are the middle ones, the pink and the red, that bring you together. The collaboration needed between industry, finance, to define the new businesses, and then again the partnerships to test new technologies. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said we need to rethink how we go from the lab to scale. And that is, how do we do this through the facilitation of the partnerships, to have the large corporations like ourselves that have the pathway to scale, working with the smaller companies or the academics who are really just at the smallest scale, and then understanding that whole pathway and looking for opportunities to accelerate. But I think it continues to come down to, Manny, that this isn't an all of the above problem. And all of these are elements of the solution.
Yeah, agreed. All right, moving on to the last one. What should the city of Houston do to accelerate energy transition, innovation, and collaboration? And this is an open-ended, free-form input from all of you. So please fire away.
Manny, if you look at those first 3, it again reinforces a theme: EV charging, technology that can be deployed today.
Yep.
Form to work collaboratively. We got to change the way we do things. Pilot projects, we got to get technologies out there. There's a technology gap. We need research. We need to work together to support and facilitate the partnership. So these are great concepts, and you kind of mix all this together, and I think you have the components of a solution set.
Excellent. Yes, agreed. So listen, this is excellent. I just want to thank everybody for their participation. I do want to thank you again, Vijay, for joining us today, and thanks for all the great perspectives that you were able to, bundle up in the short fireside chat. And with that, let me hand it back to you, Jenny. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks, Manny and Vijay, for a strong opening segment. Great insights from both of you, as well as our audience. I'm eager to see what our next two segments will have in store. And with that, let's get into our second segment focused on talent reskilling. Please join me in welcoming Alik Datta, Managing Director at Accenture, and Brandon Grosvenor, Vice President of Strategic Development at Opito. I'm sure many of you, if not most, are not familiar with Opito. Opito is a nonprofit global skills organization for the energy industry, focused on creating workforce development solutions and building a safe and competent workforce. Opito builds and maintains internationally recognized training standards and qualification frameworks, and also manages the oil and gas technical apprenticeship program in the UK to support the current and future needs of the industry. Opito is currently looking to expand to Houston in various capacities. Alik, Brandon, over to you.
Jenny, thank you so much. And so thank you to the audience. We heard yesterday from Bobby Tudor, Houston's strategy for the energy transition, of which talent reskilling is a major component and the focus of today's conversation with Brandon. So Brandon, just to kick off, the topic, can you tell us a little bit about what Opito does? Jenny mentioned some of the highlights, but perhaps you can speak to Opito and your involvement in the energy skills transition.
Sure, Alik, and I first want to say I'm really excited about the opportunity to participate in this panel. As Jenny said, we are a not-for-profit skills and safety training standards body for the energy industry. And while our roots are in skills and competence for the offshore oil and gas workforce, we're in the middle of our own energy transition journey. So we're a founding member of the Energy Skills Alliance in the UK, which we're working with other industry bodies and stakeholders to help create an integrated skills strategy for a net zero UK energy industry. And we're championing an integrated all energy workforce. So we're focused on several initiatives as part of this collaborative approach to develop the skilled workforce needed to support the energy transition. Now, one key initiative is working with government, industry, and academia to better understand the future energy skills demand and supply. And we'll be working to produce a clear forecast of both short-term and long-term energy skills demand. Now, secondly, we're both driving an integrated STEM program to cultivate the energy workforce. We recently launched the My Energy Future website, which is www.myenergyfuture.co.uk, which has created an engaging digital platform with some really compelling content to let the next generation understand the role they can play in the energy transition, as well as understand the exciting opportunities and careers in the energy industry. And then finally, we're working to develop an all-energy apprenticeship program that's aimed at broadening the existing oil and gas technical apprenticeship program to support roles across wider energy.
Brandon, it's amazing work that Opito is doing, particularly with the UK government around the idea of identifying the skills and the websites. One of the key topics you mentioned, your third bullet was around apprenticeships. In the U.S. market, Brandon, there's a little bit of a perhaps misperceptions or misunderstandings of how apprenticeships can apply in the oil and gas sector, and particularly related to the energy transition. Can you speak about the idea of apprenticeships and driving the skills for the energy transition?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that here in the U.S., when you hear apprentice or apprenticeship, a lot of times we start thinking about job roles that are associated with building construction trades, and we really kind of focus on blue-collar jobs. I think the key takeaway is how this ties into an industry skill strategy that apprenticeships can be created and structured to be effective measures that enhance both recruitment and development across job functions. So, not just your technical roles. So there's a lot of ongoing research that's looking at future job roles required to support the energy industry and energy transition. And like I said, these job roles aren't just technical in nature. I think it's important to look at apprenticeships as a model for development in which you're structuring a program that prepares candidates with required classroom-based hours, but also then prepares them with a clear path for workplace experience and ultimately establishing defined outcomes that are associated with workplace assessment, which really ties it all together. So this structure can be applied across job families. I think that apprenticeships can be built to develop job functions that are, have been and will continue to be critical to the industry. So looking at things like supply chain, project management, those type of professional roles, and also, relevant areas like finance and accounting or human resources, or even on the commercial side of the business. So I think that's the key takeaway is it's a great structure that can be applied across job roles.
Brendan, as you were speaking, a couple things that I took away is, apprenticeships is a combination of both, classroom-based training. It's work, actual practical application, and it's applicable not just to technical roles, it's across job roles. It sounds like you're coming from, Elpito is coming from quite a bit of experience in this space. So what have you seen, work particularly well in terms of how apprenticeships can drive, new skilling and reskilling, perhaps maybe from some of the experiences you had in the UK that we can learn from here in Houston?
Yeah, so, I think, Alik, really it's, these types of discussions are happening around the world. And I think it's important to recognize the carbon reduction goals that are being set globally and the impact that has on the demand for talent. So these goals and targets are aggressive, and we're going to have to attract new people to the industry. And we as an industry are going to be competing for skilled talent to support all the upcoming projects and initiatives. So, really when you look at apprenticeships and you look at reskilling or upskilling programs as being a key part of attracting, developing, and keeping talent in the industry, I think that's a really important perspective and a good way to kind of look at these programs is the important part that they play in that, that talent attraction and maintaining that pool of talent to support all these projects. I also think that as companies kind of diversify their portfolios into areas like offshore wind or hydrogen, solar, carbon capture, many of the things that we've discussed over the last 2 days, it's important to consider skill strategies and the sustainable development of talent as part of creating a really effective recruitment and retention strategy. So I'll go back a little bit to apprenticeships and why we see them as effective strategies as part of a larger, more comprehensive skills program. Apprenticeships are particularly attractive to the workforce for a number of reasons. First, apprentices are paid while they train, and they're developing relevant skills that have been defined by the industry. And what we're looking at now is in supporting the energy transition. Secondly, apprentices are supported as they progress through the program through mentorship as well as through their direct supervisors at their sponsoring company. And I think finally, apprentices typically end up with full-time positions upon successful completion of these programs. So it's a very attractive proposition for people seeking employment. From the employer perspective, apprenticeships are beneficial because they allow employers to really attract, develop, and retain talent for the specific job areas that they need, not just current jobs, but jobs that align with their future ambitions and future projects. And so in doing so, they can also focus on closing those skill gaps that may exist. And I think really when you talk about what we're looking at when it comes to skills and apprenticeships, One thing that we've set out to accomplish is to identify the core skills that are common across emerging energy jobs and incorporate those into an all energy apprenticeship program. So this is one of the remits of the Energy Skills Alliance. And the approach being is that we want to minimize unnecessary duplication in new skilling or reskilling initiatives, and work to build a reskilling strategy that's focused on leveraging the existing skills and then quickly closing those gaps. So I think something else to highlight is the ongoing collaboration. That's been a theme throughout, is the collaboration across industry, with government, with academia, and not only supporting these apprenticeship programs or strategies, but further identifying the needed skills to support energy transition, understanding the gaps and opportunities, and really recognizing the need that we must, across all facets.
So what you mentioned a couple of points, around that topic, right? The value of apprenticeships and what both employers can get out of it and employees, right? So the what's in it for me for both of the stakeholders, which is absolutely critical to make these programs work. Then you also mentioned, the fact that, the apprenticeship program sort of fits into a bit of a holistic talent strategy. It's a part of the solution, not the entire solution. So we've seen organizations take different approaches to tackling the energy, the energy transition talent gap, right? Whether it be looking internally to upskill, reskill, looking externally, perhaps just to buy or build the talent in collaboration with universities. As companies start thinking about their holistic talent strategies around these topics, how do you view the merits of either approach, the idea of looking internally or externally?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly positive aspects for both approaches. I think that it is important that organizations leverage their existing talent as much as they can. There are certainly roles where skills are transferable or going to be transferable as part of the energy transition. And it's important to recognize that and upskill or provide training and develop or further development to prepare the existing workforce to be able to adapt those skill sets to the new opportunities and challenges. So this type of strategy shows commitment to your employees, and it also opens the door to new opportunities and potential alternative revenue streams for employers. Now, as technology evolves across the energy industry and into the energy transition, we as an industry will need to attract expertise from other areas. So organizations can gain a lot from bringing in external talent. And this strategy can be particularly effective when you need a specific skill set or a team, and you need that quickly. So in some of these cases, when taking that model, companies can utilize those new employees and the skill sets to bring in support for these upskilling or reskilling initiatives. So kind of taking the best of both approaches, if you will, and leveraging that to upskill or reskill the existing talent base while executing work that may have been traditionally outside their core business. I think either way you approach it, it becomes part of a larger challenge for companies as they aim to align their talent management and employee development strategies with their own operational requirements as they diversify their portfolios. And one thing that we've been working on, I think is a good example, is we've been working with an offshore wind company on their people and skills strategy. And these considerations are really key when looking at retention of existing talent and then attracting new talent and skills. And something to take into account with these strategies is how they align with project-based work. And now as we look at the energy transition and how some of this work is, opportunities present themselves, it is project-based. So, you have to factor that in to a company's ability to staff up quickly, which I think it's really important to consider that we're going to face some pretty immense challenges considering that we're competing against other industries for talent. So creating these strategies that are attractive to bring in that pool of talent, I think is extremely important.
Perfect. And Brandon, just to close out, before we reach out to the audience, so very briefly, a lot of the folks on the call, are perhaps leaders here within the city of Houston. So where can the city of Houston lend itself in supporting or enabling the right talent and skills to underpin the energy transition? And yeah, perfect.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, events like this are a great start. And, personally, I think, we need to recognize the great work that the Greater Houston Partnership's doing, along with the city of Houston, Mayor Turner and his leadership, and really everyone attending today has a vested interest in what the energy transition means for our city. So bringing stakeholders together that are both directly involved as well as indirectly supporting the energy transition, identifying those common needs for skills and development, and fostering this type of discussion really lays the foundation for the creation for skills and workforce development strategies. I think it's also important to recognize the critical role that our community colleges and local universities play in this discussion. And, in my personal experience, I've been very impressed at their ability to stand up technical and professional based certificates and degree programs to support the energy industry already. And so really, Houston is a truly international city, as it was highlighted yesterday, and we have a rich history in the energy industry. I think we're well positioned to serve as an example for what skills development can look like as part of the energy transition. I think there are a few areas to focus on going forward. First, there needs to be continued engagement with industry, with education, really that collaborative approach and ongoing dialogue to facilitate investment and commitment to skills programs. Secondly, and this is kind of longer term view, is a collaborative approach to funding and implementing STEM initiatives and attracting young people and talent into our industry to maintain a sustainable pipeline. And thirdly, I've touched on it quite a bit, but I think that industry-supported apprenticeship schemes and other skills development program play a really important role in creating and maintaining that sustainable pipeline. So I think that these specific initiatives and really considering the potential funding opportunities that may be available to companies as well as academia that are associated with energy transition, and applying for these grants or this funding when it's available is something else to consider. And I think, I'll close by saying, I think that this has been a great discussion, and we're really excited to continue the discussion with the likes of the Greater Houston Apprenticeship Network and the wider energy industry. And I think really it's an exciting time as we look forward to work together to achieve our goals as the world's leading energy city.
Wonderful, Brandon. Thank you so much for some really compelling insights, around the concept of apprenticeships and how they apply to, the energy transition and the reskilling journey that we all have to undertake, and most importantly, how the city of Houston and the multiple stakeholders within the city of Houston can contribute. Let's quickly hand over, and I'm cognizant of time, but let's quickly hand over and gather some feedback from the audience. So if at all possible, can we pull up the Menti screen? And we'd love to get the audience's feedback on some of the concepts that we discussed today. So if y'all can log in to menti.com, and the code is 98474386, and we'll get started. So as we transition, the first question we'd love to hear from the audience around is, how would you rate your knowledge of the skills required for the energy transition? And this is a bit of a high, medium, low question. Wonderful, Brandon. I think as we see the responses coming in, it seems like a lot of the work that Opito and the Greater Houston Partnership can do is to create more visibility, around these skill sets and create, a semblance of alignment on what these skills are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that's going to require further dialogue and really understanding in terms of identifying those skills. But yeah, so there's work to do, but I'm really encouraged by the work that's ongoing already.
Perfect. Hey, moving on to the next question. Are current jobs in the core oil and gas business, and here we're referring to both upstream, downstream, midstream, portable to a low carbon world? I mean, this is a fascinating question, and we're seeing that, you know, a lot of people are responding to, well, actually, it's becoming almost like a 50-50 split. Well, now it's leaning heavily towards yes. I think, Brandon, based on the strategy that Bobby Tudor presented yesterday, as well as, you know, the work of both of our firms, I think the yes seems to be yes seems to be clear. So let's move on to the next question. So to the audience, this is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the least developed and 5 being the most developed. How would you rate your organization's talent strategy for careers related to the energy transition? So again, 1 is the most developed, 1 is the least developed, 5 is the most developed. And it looks like, you know, a lot of our audience sees that their organizations are working the problem, but there seems to be some room to take it to the next level, Brandon.
Yeah, certainly, and I think that's where a lot of companies are right now. It's taking the existing frameworks and strategies that have been successful in traditional, fossil fuels and traditional oil and gas approaches, and applying those into their new endeavors in renewables and wider energy.
Thank you. So just moving on to the next question. Are you aware, as our audience, of certifications and training programs within your organization related to the energy transition? Perfect. And what we're taking away from this is there's either an opportunity to build these programs within our audience's organizations, and or better market them if they exist. So thank you so much to the audience. And then just moving on to the next question, which is sort of the antithesis of the first one, right? Are you aware of certifications and training programs external to your organization related to the energy transition? Perfect, Brendan. As you know, with a few seconds left, I think what we're seeing is that there's an opportunity to either define and or market, you know, these certifications and training programs, you know, both internally and externally, you know, amongst our audience.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's part of the talent development discussion as well. So absolutely.
Perfect. And then just to close out, yeah, y'all are reading it. So would you send your employees to a reskilling program at a local university sponsored by your company? Perfect. So it sounds like there's a resounding yes here in that if they existed, or if we make them aware and make these types of reskilling programs available, it sounds like there's an interest from our audience. So as the voting winds down, I just want to conclude this segment by saying, first, thank you, Brandon, for your insights and feedback around this topic and all the work Opito is doing. And I'll hand it back to Jenny for the next segment. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks, Alik and Brandon. As we can tell from the conversation and the survey responses, there's a lot of opportunity around talent reskilling in the new energy space. It's such an important topic for the partnership, and I'm very excited to see what's in store for Opito here in Houston and our other efforts around upskilling, such as our own Upskill Houston initiative at the partnership. For our final segment on Houston's brand and its importance in attracting leading energy companies and startups, please join me in welcoming David Robley, Managing Director at Accenture, and Neil Golightly, Senior Counselor at Sard Verbinnen, a global communication strategy consultancy. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Neil over the past 6 months in development of the Houston Energy Transition Strategy that Bobby unveiled yesterday, for which Neil worked with us as an independent consultant. Prior to that, Neil spent several years with Shell in external relations and energy transition roles. David, Neil, over to you.
Jenny, thank you so much for that. And thank you to the other innovation sessions we've just heard from. It'd be great to close this out strongly, Neil. So really looking forward to your insights over the next 15, 20 minutes. Yesterday, Bobby Tudor came out and said that the title of energy capital of the world is Houston's to lose. How do you see Houston evolving its brand and its positioning in the light of the energy transition over the coming years?
It's a great question, David. And first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And thanks for what all of you at Accenture have done to pull this event together and this project together. I think there are three things that I would say about that whole question of branding and image of Houston, especially when it comes to the energy transition. One is it's just about axiomatic of any effort to change an image, to change a brand, to change a reputation, that you have to change the underlying reality first. The good news is, in my view anyway, much of that reality is already changing. It's well down the road. 10 years ago, when I first came to Houston, the topic of climate change was simply not one that ever came up in polite conversation in Houston. The notion that energy needed to be decarbonized, that was a conversation going on in very sort of small niche offices in the various companies around town. Oil and gas was not only the most important game in town, in many respects, it was kind of the only game in town. 10 years further on, radically different conversation going on in Houston. In terms of the awareness, the recognition that this is an urgent challenge, decarbonizing energy, the energy transition, the commitment to being involved in it, the commitment to driving it forward. And it's not just the conversation that has changed, but it's also the underlying actions in the city. If you look at the fact, for example, that the city is one of the first with a climate action plan. All of the city's power comes from renewable sources, for example. ExxonMobil just announced a proposal for decarbonizing the ship channel. Massive development. And all those things are just a few examples of that reality that's actually changed. Second point that I would make is that it's so important when a city like Houston, when a business community like Houston is looking to engage with an audience to change its brand, to change its reputation, that it understand who is the audience it's trying to talk to, and what does that audience need to hear. So, my view might be that as we embrace the energy transition, as we move forward with the strategy that Bobby laid out yesterday, that the audience is the next generation of talent. The audience is that capital that is looking for ESG opportunities. The audience is those innovators out there that are truly looking to change the world and make the world a better place. What do they need to hear from Houston? They need to hear from Houston that we are serious about that challenge, that we understand what the problem is, that the debate has in fact moved on from if and why this is important to how and how fast that we're going to make it happen. And then the third point I would make is simply that to get people's attention, this needs to be big. It needs to be bold. It needs to capture the imagination. I'm reminded of the fact that just a couple miles down the road at Rice University back in 1962, JFK stood up, gave us the great moonshot speech. He said, "We do these things not because they're easy, we do them because they're hard." I can't think of anything much harder right now for the next decade or two or three than transitioning a global energy system to a low carbon energy system. For Houston to take that on feels not only appropriate, but it feels like it honors the history that Houston has of taking on massive challenges and delivering them.
Fantastic. So when you delve into that question, Houston, as the energy capital of the world, has largely been associated with the oil and gas industry. Over the last 2 days, we've heard consistently how oil and gas have to play a part in the energy transition, and most projections, if not all projections of the transition going forward, have a key role for oil and gas. Yet, the industry has also been associated with some of the emission challenges of today and perhaps has a lack of trust amongst the wider communities. How can Houston overcome these barriers, work with the industry that it has, and turn around that story for the city?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I would say to that. One is there is an acknowledgement that this is, the reality of this challenge are multidimensional, right? We talk about the dual challenge. The world needs more energy. It needs less CO2. I almost think of it in terms of almost a triple challenge. It needs more energy, less CO2, and we need to do all of that in a way that creates value for our economy, that creates jobs, that creates value for shareholders. Those three things remind me of F. Scott Fitzgerald's famous line, the sign of a first-rate intelligence is to hold opposing ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. The complexity of the challenge is one that needs to be articulated and it needs to be explained in a way that resonates and meets the needs of the audiences that we've got. So yes, there is going to be a role for oil and gas. There has to be a role for oil and gas forward. I think one of the keys, just to close that thought out, one of the keys to that is that we need to find ways to move away from the demonization of the product and the people that produce that product, and move towards how do we make that product relevant? How do we make it competitive? How do we make sure that it can play its role in a decarbonized, lower carbon, net zero emissions future? That's going to be a challenge. You're absolutely right that there's a lot of baggage that the industry carries along with it, mainly because of the inevitable history of the past, but moving past that, developing trust. The last thing I'll say is a lot of listening needs to be done. And I come from this industry, so I can say this honestly. We come from a place where we tend to think, okay, we've got the technical prowess, we'll come up with the answer and we'll let you know what that answer is, and we're pretty sure it's going to be the right one. That doesn't really work that way when it comes to building trust. It's more about sitting down with your stakeholders, sitting down with your audience and saying, what do you think? We want to listen to you. Where are you coming from?
Very good. One thing I think we've heard consistently this morning and before is that it takes a village to raise a child. It's going to take all of the possible institutions, whether they're academia, whether they're public bodies, whether they're groups such as the GHP, and private companies to deliver on the energy transition. Houston has many successes to point to over the last few years of these groups coming together in fresh ways. What would you see as the next step for this, and what would really stand out in terms of delivering against the ambition of the transition for Houston?
It's a great question, and really it's embedded both explicitly and implicitly, I think, in the blueprint that the Greater Houston Partnership just rolled out yesterday and that Bobby talked about. I think a couple of things are really important. One is this whole notion of collaboration. Collaboration is not anything new within the industry, but collaboration across sectors is something that we haven't done as much of in the past, and it really is important when you think about energy as a system. It's not just an industry with a bunch of energy producers that sell this on. It's a system where you've got users, you've got a demand side of that equation, you've got a supply side of that equation, you've got an investment side of that equation. So the collaboration across all those sectors to look at how we rethink the entire system is part of, I think, part of the answer to that question. The other part, and this I think is really important, it came out to, really came home to me in all of those 60 conversations with stakeholders around town that Bobby talked about. The assumption that every single entity within that system needs to be on the same path is the wrong assumption. Because it is a system, because various entities, various companies, various sectors, various nonprofits, government entities, all have a specialized role to play in this overall system. We shouldn't expect every single company, for example, even within the industry, to be doing the same thing, to be taking the same strategy. There are going to be companies that are going to be very focused, for example, on oil and gas and making oil and gas competitive and relevant in that low carbon industry. There are going to be other companies that take a very different approach, and that's appropriate to that overall system.
Fantastic. I mean, clearly multiple roles to be played, but something the city can also do is really expand the pie. And that really, to me, means attracting that next wave of innovators, of thinkers, of startups.
Yeah.
And it's really something that Houston has been leading at the fore over the last 5 years or so, has really been establishing an innovation ecosystem and has much success to point to. So thinking specifically around the transition, what do you think Houston can learn from other cities around the world? Or what are some of the qualities that are going to continue to accelerate how we can attract leaders and talent into this ecosystem to really build that system to the next level?
Yeah, I think there are some lessons to be learned. I think actually other cities have got some lessons to learn from Houston as well. But I think Houston is in fact beginning to look at how some other cities have done this. For example, Rotterdam in the Netherlands. They've done some amazing things when it comes to thinking about decarbonizing a ship channel. Well, guess what? We've got this ship channel right down the road here. Rather than reinvent that wheel, why not sit down with some of the folks at Rotterdam and look at where the similarities might be, how they have led collaboration, how they have worked with their government, how they've worked with the various companies within that system to see if there's anything that they've done that we might be able to borrow. When we talk about innovation ecosystems, Boston, a great example of how that interaction between very, very high-powered academic institutions and a very, very vigorous and vibrant startup community creates all kinds of sparks of innovation. What can we learn from Boston? Oh, by the way, Bobby and others have visited Boston, and of course we've got Emily Reichert here with Greentown Labs, who's opened up an office down here. And one of the things that is very, very clear from our interactions with Boston is that Houston can be a laboratory for scaling up many of the ideas and the innovations that are taking root in Boston. So that partnership between that hub of innovation and the ability to take that and say, okay, now how do we make it really big? How do we prove it out in this massive laboratory with the huge infrastructure we've got in Houston is just an amazing opportunity.
Neil, I really appreciate how you're putting excitement into this journey, right? So that the city does not see this as a threat, but really is that opportunity combined with the challenge. But something which, when we think about the transition is also important is what's the impact on the community? What is the impact on equality? What is the impact on the wider goals? It's not just about inventing the next technology, but it's making sure that the energy system really meets the needs of people going forward. What types of initiative do you think Houston should therefore prioritize as it thinks through, establishing itself as the energy transition capital of the world that would really yield the greatest benefit to the wider communities in the city and beyond?
What a great question. And I'm smiling only because in some of the conversations, many of the conversations that we had, the 60 that I referred to earlier, a lot of the CEOs in the industry in this city will quietly behind closed doors say, this whole notion of social equity, of climate equity, of making sure that we're inclusive is really important to us, but we're just not quite sure how to do that quite yet. So it's almost like they're not quite ready to talk about it publicly, but it is such an important topic. And I'm really glad you brought it up. It is, I think, one of the next opportunities in the iteration of the blueprint that we rolled out yesterday, the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, is how do we now take the fundamental concepts behind that and look at ways, for example, to ensure that as we are building out a energy transition infrastructure, we're protecting the air quality of underserved neighborhoods, just as an example. How might, for example, low carbon transportation systems actually not only reduce the amount of CO2 emissions, but actually serve the transportation needs of communities that are underserved when it comes to public transportation, for example. How can the skilling and the upskilling efforts that we talked about in the last segment, how can they be architected in such a way that it is very, very inclusive of all citizens within Houston? So those are just a few of the things that bring the topic of energy transition, make it very relevant to a broader civic community agenda in a very positive way, by the way. This isn't about wearing a hair shirt, as you said. It's not about a threat. It's not about defensiveness. It's about, gosh, this opens up all kinds of doors of opportunity.
I totally agree. Neil, thank you very much for your insights and for sharing that with us this morning. As I hope we're now familiar, we're looking to move to the Menti. And so I imagine you've got it nailed in terms of getting onto the questions. And so I really would like to get your feedback around some of these points as well that we've got this morning. So if it would be possible to put that up on the screen, we'll get straight into it. Okay, so I assume it's up.
While we're waiting for that, David, can I throw a question at you?
Absolutely.
I know you spent some time in cities around the world doing this kind of work, Singapore in particular. Any observations you have on things that Houston should be picking up and learning from other places in the world?
Yeah, Neil, I'm lucky. I've been in Houston for a decade, but I had quite an international experience beforehand. And one reflection is I think Houston has everything it needs to be totally relevant in the transition. We have the transportation, we have the ship channel, we have the chemicals industry, we have refining, we have an adjacency to talent and academic institutions. What I think, though, is that what we perhaps are lagging on just a slightly is that coordination with policy and action coming together. But if I look at my experience over the last 2-3 years, I see a night and day change in the narrative. And I think that just points to the signals being completely aligned with moving forward.
Yep.
So I believe, guys, we have the Menti questions up. And so you've had plenty of time to answer. So the question, just to verbalize it, was Houston has a rich economy beyond energy. Should we prioritize the transition, or should we also look to complement with other industries? And so clearly the community really feels that energy transition is the right message to go forward with, and a pretty dominant sense coming from this score. So if we move to the second question, if that's okay. I'm really interested to find out your perspective in terms of what future headline or brand should Houston look to emphasize, and what will be most appealing to you? And so really the choices here are to be the energy transition capital of the world, to be the net zero energy capital of the world, to be the clean tech energy capital of the world, emphasizing more the technology side, or to really emphasize back on low carbon energy.
I'll just make a comment here, David. I'm sort of glad to see clean tech doesn't register as terribly popular. I think we're moving away pretty rapidly from clean tech to climate tech and other terms, only because clean does imply that there's something wrong, there's something dirty about the other parts of the energy system. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we could make as we go forward, is to imply that there are good guys and bad guys. There are various roles that all players play in the solution.
Thank you, Neil. I would also compliment seeing net zero come to the fore is great. The net zero story is one that's really resonating beyond the boundaries of the conventional consumers or participants in energy.
Really important.
So putting this to Houston, how will Houston earn the right to this title? And really asking the question, what should we most be known for moving forward? 4 options to consider: the advanced materials, innovation and technology, carbon trading, or hydrogen. So definitely an interesting bipolar split in the feedback, with hydrogen being a really strong performer, given that it's a single energy vector going forward. But technology and hydrogen really standing out to me from the participants. So we just moved to the penultimate question of the morning. And this is really for us to understand your sense in terms of the qualities that Houston should emphasize in order to promote itself as a great city for startups and innovation within the context of the energy transition. And so it would be great to rank across funding and access to capital, mentorship and networking, the higher education presence and research, affordability for both employees and new businesses, the relevant skilled labor pool, and engineering capabilities, and then 6, the ecosystem, i.e. that means really the combination of government policy and the city. This question has a little bit more to read, so just give it a couple more minutes or seconds. But I think we're starting, Neil, to already see a real sense that it's the availability of the labor pool and the supportive ecosystem that are really rising in the chart as we see it drive live.
It's really good to see that that emphasis on the collaboration there at the top. And the various entities working together. You know, the challenge is just so huge and it's so multifaceted that any one sector doing it alone is just not going to work. So that's good to see.
Excellent. And if we move just to the final opportunity for feedback this morning, it's to come back to which policies do we consider as most important to addressing that topic which we ended our discussion around, which was environmental justice. And so how can we best achieve this? So the options here are really addressing the health disparities, adopting policies and actions to support lower income communities and to protect from air pollution, to upgrade the energy infrastructure, or to really emphasize Houston's role in delivering equitable energy solutions to the world. So that, I guess, implies beyond the geographic boundaries of Houston, but to see the energy transition capital of the world being a role that really gives back to the, from Houston to the globe. So just as the answers roll in, again, energy infrastructure upgrades and really seeing Houston establish, retain its platform in the world energy system look to me to be what we need to make sure we're supporting the most actively from a policy standpoint. So with that, Neil, invite you, any closing reflections and thoughts, and then we move on.
I would just say just the defining challenge for society in the 21st century, in my view, is the challenge of climate change and getting to net zero and trying to do our best to limit the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And there is no reason in the world that I can see why Houston should not be at the forefront of tackling that challenge and in providing the solution.
With that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Jenny. It's great to have participated in the sessions that we've just had. As we reach the conclusion of the 90 minutes, I'd love to get your sense back in terms of some of the highlights for you of the conversation we've had. What really stood out to you, and how do you think some of the feedback from the session and the panelists and the audience today really complements the strategy that the GHP has developed for Houston going forward?
Yeah, well, thanks, David. Thank you to all the panelists and the participants on Menti. Really appreciate your engagement in these topics. And, some common threads is really around opportunity, right? It's the opportunity around talent, the opportunity around positioning Houston and leading in this transition and being a solutions partner for low carbon technologies, for a net zero future. It's also around the opportunity around collaboration, whether that's among industry players within the energy industry or outside the energy industry, and across with academia, the innovation ecosystem. There's just a lot of opportunity for collaboration, but there's also this big question mark, right? No one knows exactly what this path forward to net zero in 2050 looks like. No one knows exactly what the talent ecosystem, what the opportunities and skill sets are. And, we're all learning and trying to map that out and understand, where is the challenge and the opportunity for Houston to capture, and whether that is in talent or establishing our presence or building out our innovation ecosystem and industry collaborations.
I totally agree. I thought it was very interesting when Vijay was talking this morning. He said up front, we're working on the toughest problems to crack. And then through the course of the debate, he brought in that we're also working, ExxonMobil is working on the most scalable problems to crack. And I think it's great to remember you need both.
Yep.
Right? You need to be able to scale what we solve. And so when we think of Houston, how do you think Houston should be thinking about the different energy solution types that are going to be relevant to our future? The Menti question highlighted, I think, CCUS.
Yep.
But we've certainly seen hydrogen come up time and time again through the morning. So what's running through your mind as you think around what Houston should be becoming known for and investing in?
Yeah, it is about scalability. It's also about being able to export that expertise. Houston, we don't actually produce any oil within our city limits, right? It's all about the technology, the expertise that we export to nations all around the world. We've done that with oil and gas for decades. So how do we establish that knowledge base in Houston for the low carbon future, for net zero solutions as well? And there's a lot of opportunity, whether it is those large scale infrastructure solutions around CCUS or hydrogen. It could also be around understanding financial markets and carbon trading. I was in the survey for Menti, I was sad that there was only one person who voted for advanced materials. And I think that there's incredible opportunity in Houston, especially with the Welch Institute at Rice University around advanced materials, because at the core of these solutions is breaking down into, essentially what the first session was talking about, right? Like the innovation around the components that won't change, right? The laws of physics exist, but it's around the application and deployment of that as well. And so there are a lot of strong ingredients in Houston to be able to scale that and deploy that.
Very good. I often think of the energy transition being more of an energy convergence, in that we need all solutions to be relevant, and achieving that requires technology, markets, consumers, to really come together. Something in Brandon's discussion, which I think is really important to reflect on, though, is the question of jobs and job portability. And so part of the research that the GHP has done has been to look at what are some scenarios for job opportunity. Yeah. And one of the feedbacks from this morning, which stood out to me, was that 2/3 of the audience felt that the jobs in the oil and gas industry are potentially portable to the energy transition. So what do you think, as you reflect on the 60 interviews and the work that's been done, what is going to make the difference in terms of realizing that job opportunity as part of the transition the city goes through?
Yep. And, a lot of this is looking at what are those core elements that are true in the future of work across any industry. So a lot of the conversations that we had in our stakeholder interviews was around digitization and the digital economy, right? And the truth that exists for energy exists for healthcare, for the construction industry, for any manufacturing sector, around this movement towards the importance of robotics and AI and cybersecurity. And so that digital tech ability is critically important, whether we're looking at energy or non-energy industries. The other component too is thinking through how would the energy industry position itself to compete with a millennial mindset, or actually that's aging out, an even younger mindset, so that they aren't perceived as the problem, right? But really being a part of identifying those solutions that can solve this huge 21st century challenge of decarbonization. And so there's both that element of the structural assets that the community can work together to provide, and the session with Opito talking about how do we draw on our community college network, how do we draw on our university system, and then also the partnerships within our employers. And luckily that connective tissue is in existence, but how do we strengthen that and shorten the feedback loops on the talent that's needed and then what's being produced.
Very good. And then finally, as we reflect on the brand, something we often discuss with our clients is what's the impact of disruption on your industry. And it's a typical theme that those companies that have had the greatest success in the past sometimes face the most challenging journeys in terms of competing in the new worlds. And Houston certainly has had its success.
Sure.
And I think we came back to many times today that the opportunity that's ahead of oil and gas, but we also need to recognize the narrative shift that the city would want to partner with the leading companies in driving. So if you think about that narrative shift, Jenny, for a moment, maybe in 12 months from now, the next time we have a conference like this, what do you think might be some of what we could look forward to over the next 12 months, and how would we know we're kind of moving in the right direction on making that a reality?
Yeah. And when we talk about shifting perception or the messaging around a brand, it has to be behind, there must be substance behind that, right? What we would hope is to be able to have a better understanding of not only where industry is, but also where the communities are across Houston, and understanding how a net zero future could impact them. What are the solution sets that we as a community should be thinking about? And I think really it's about being able to draw on more than just a kind of myopic viewpoint of what the solution set could be or should be. And then also thinking through, what are those big items? We know companies all have their different strategic positions of how they plan to deploy assets over time. Some of those are incremental step outs, but then what are those exciting transformative ideas that we can shout from the rooftops across the world that this is why Houston is leading the transition, so that we have proof points, across the entire spectrum of incremental, progressive to transformative solutions that people will look at and say, what Houston is doing is incredible and will help us get to these net zero ambitions.
I love it. It brings us back to the bold bets that Darren was talking about earlier this morning. With that, I would like to thank you and the partnership so much for the opportunity to participate this morning. And then I believe your closing remarks will be next.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And thank you to the team and from Accenture for leading a robust discussion. As you can see, the ingredients are there for Houston to achieve its goal of becoming the energy transition capital of the world. Much of the work remains to be done, but the momentum is present. And there is consensus among players, large and small, that we must act. The sessions today touched on 3 important ecosystem enabling actions. First, energy technology and innovation is core to the broader technological renaissance happening here in Houston. The new solutions being developed and brought to scale by startups, major corporations, and organizations in between are critical to Houston's long-term economic success, providing opportunity for our region through the next era and strengthening our position as a great global city. Houston must also ensure that the economic growth resulting from capturing value during the transition is equitable and that job opportunities and access to education and skilling are available for talent across all levels. On a related note, I wanted to share that the partnership recently launched the first regional equity and inclusion assessment, which will help companies measure progress on talent representation and advancement, supplier diversity, and best practices in 15 categories. The partnership is excited to provide this confidential online tool to help businesses enhance their equity and inclusion strategy, measure progress, and increase community impact. Please review the Day 2 digital recap for the link to register for this assessment. And finally, the third area of changing Houston's perception from resisting the transition to one of embracing and leading in the global effort to address climate change. I hope you will join us tomorrow for day 3 of our conference presented by our partners at the Center for Houston's Future, when we discuss the important role hydrogen will play in the energy transition. Thank you and have a wonderful day.